This story is told from the perspective of a female. I, as many other young professionals, have been forced to share a house with strangers. The ultimate potluck, randoms that you do not know and would probably never usually speak to under normal circumstances. They could end up becoming your best friends or your worst enemy. They could be the nicest people to be around, or they could make your life a living hell. You just don't know what you're going to be stuck with. That idea always freaked me out, but due to financial circumstances, I've never had much of a choice. It gets harder and harder every year for people that are just getting onto the job ladder to get a place of their own. It is a sad reality that many people face nowadays. To get into this story, I'd been living in a shared house in Manchester, England. This house had a very high turnover rate. People would very often come and go. It was no big deal, to be honest. On my floor, there were only 2 rooms. It was the top floor of the house. A guy in his late 30s who I did not know very well, but was always very friendly with, had just moved out, and I received a text message from the landlord saying that a new guy had moved into the room next door to mine. On one afternoon, I knocked on his door to introduce myself and welcome him to the house. Strangely enough, he didn't answer, and I knew he was home because I could hear his TV and I'd just heard him moving around. I knocked again, but nothing. He just wouldn't answer. I forgot about the whole introduction and moved on. It would not be long, however, until shit started getting weird. After a few days, this guy began playing pornography with his speakers on full at really odd hours, like 1 AM and 5 AM. He had it on full blast. The whole house could hear it. I knocked on his door to tell him to turn it down, but again, he just didn't answer the door. To add to all of this, there was also this horrific smell that came from his room that began creeping into my room. It was like raw sewage. I knew it was coming from his room, and the most frustrating part was that he would not open his door for me to confront him about it, so I couldn't solve the issue. I began asking other members of the house if they'd ever met this guy. What was really freaky is that not only had nobody in the house ever met or seen this guy, they'd never actually seen him leave his room, like at all. He never went to the bathroom, he never took a shower, never cooked or left the house, just nothing. In the mix of all this, I got a new boyfriend, and he began staying over on weekends. He also noticed a horrific smell and began getting worried for my safety. He also attempted to knock on the guy's door to see if he could solve the problem, but he had no luck getting through to the guy either. The smell began getting worse and worse. It was pretty much unbearable. It was getting to the point where myself and others in the house were on the verge of calling the authorities. The late night pornography playing on full volume also continued every so often, and sometimes in the middle of the night, I could hear him breathing heavy and aggressively going to town on himself, almost as though he was doing it right by my wall. On one night, I came home and opened my bedroom door. I was kind of shocked and confused when I saw that there was what looked like dust particles everywhere. Thick dust particles all over my room. I had no clue where they came from, and it was the first time it ever happened, and it was really unexplainable. I cleaned up the dust and looked all over my room and could not find any reasonable explanation for why there was so much dust. My boyfriend came over later the same day, and he also couldn't understand why. My boyfriend stayed the night and left the next day. The following night, I was asleep in my room, and I noticed that the smell from next door had somehow managed to get worse. The smell was so bad that it actually woke me up. When I opened my eyes, I noticed a beam of light shining across my room. It was the first time I'd ever seen it. Before I could look where it was coming from, the light disappeared. I laid in bed trying to understand what was going on. When the beam of light came back again, it was only for a few seconds, but long enough for me to see where it had come from. It had come from my wall, the wall that linked onto my strange neighbour. I walked over to my wall, and I began examining the area of the wall where I saw the light coming from. And then suddenly, my fingers touched something. I could feel air breezing into my fingertips. There was a small hole. I placed my finger on it and then looked through the hole. And on the other side, there was one of the most freakiest things I've ever seen. An eyeball, staring right back at me. A big dark eyeball, staring right at me. I screamed out from utter panic, but the eye didn't move. It just kept looking at me and blinking. I screamed out that I was phoning the police and ducked down in the corner of my room. I phoned the police, and after an hour, they came round and one of my other housemates let them in downstairs. When they got to my floor, my neighbour had run away with his belongings and left his door open. He had not only placed 4 peepholes in my wall and covered them up from his side, he had also been going to the bathroom in an airtight metre-long box in his room. He had tissues covered in God knows what all over the place. He never came back, and one of the worst parts is I never even met him or knew who he was. I just saw his eyeball. The dust from my room was actually wall dust, and he probably spent the night watching me and my boyfriend together. So disturbing and gross. Story 2. This story happened a year ago when I was super desperate to find a place. Like really desperate. I had only a few days to sort out my living arrangements for a new job offer that I'd just accepted. I actually was originally going for my own place, but to save time, complications, and also money, I called up the first room to rent that I could find in the local area of my work and booked a viewing with the landlord. I met the landlord outside the address and he came and met me and he showed me around the house. The house was fine, no problems. The only issue I took to the house was the fact that our doors did not have locks on them. But I brought this issue up with the landlord and he told me that he would get it sorted, which was fine by me. The other roommates were not in at the time, but the landlord assured me that they were 2 great guys. One worked in banking and the other owned his own online church. I thought that was fine and signed the contract and paid the first month's rent and deposit by bank transfer the same day. I moved in, and upon moving in, I met one of the guys that I would be living with. He opened the door for me. He didn't look very friendly. I walked into the house and said hi, and put my hand out to shake his, but he just ignored me. He then handed me a piece of paper. It was a piece of notebook paper where he'd written a load of house rules. Some of the rules consisted of no music or TV, no laughing after 9 PM, and no girlfriends allowed in the house, only married couples. I laughed at first and thought it was a joke, but he wasn't laughing. I told him that I had a girlfriend and that she would be coming to stay with me every so often, and this guy lost his shit. He told me that I had to repent to God and that I was living like a real-life demon, and he just wouldn't drop it. He actually followed me all around the house while I was unpacking, giving me the same speech over and over again. I eventually told him to go away after 10 minutes of listening to how I was the devil's spawn, and he told me that he would go away, but he was not going to forget this, and he really meant it. He ran his own online religion from home, so he was home all the time, and every time I would see him he would say, "Hey sinner," or "Hey Satan's best friend." Then really bad things began happening when my girlfriend started coming round. He called her a whore, the first time he ever met her, and when I went to my room with her, he would come and open my door and say, "Can you please leave your door open? If you're not going to show me a marriage certificate, then you shouldn't have your doors closed." I told him to F off. It was getting ridiculous now, and he got really aggressive. He walked into my room and said, "You have no lock on your door. Sleep with one eye open, my friend." It was completely freaky. Incidents kept happening. He would write "Good morning, sinner" and stick it on the fridge. And sometimes when I went out and came back from work, I could tell someone had been in my room and been through my stuff. Although I had no way to prove it, I could tell it was happening. This guy was literally making my life a living hell. He had no desire to listen to any other opinion that did not suit his own religion, and there was no compromise with this idiot. One night, I was asleep in my bed, and I began to hear chanting coming from upstairs, sort of like prayer chanting. It was going up and down in volume. I tried to ignore it, and I managed to go back to sleep. Late into the night, the prayer chanting had become very loud. I slowly opened my eyes, and when I opened them, I couldn't believe it. There were 6 men stood around my bed, dressed in cloaks, chanting a random hymn. I sat up and said, "What are you doing in my room?" And they just kept chanting. From the 6 men chanting at the end of my bed, I could recognize my roommate's figure in the middle. I got up out of bed and pushed past them. I began walking out of the house. These guys were still upstairs in my room deep into their chant. I don't think they even noticed me leave. I took out my cell phone and phoned the police from outside my house. The police told me there wouldn't be much they could do, and it would probably be better for me to move house. So I did. That guy still runs his online religion. I look at his website from time to time. So happy I was lucky enough to be able to move out in very quick fashion after that incident. Story 3. This story is told from the perspective of a female. This story happened very recently. I moved into a shared house, and by the way, this is the house where I still live today. I am lucky because all of the people in my house are super nice and really cool people. On my first weekend here, they held a welcome party for me, and I was really touched by that because they really went out of their way to make me feel welcome, which is something that a lot of people won't do. The only issue I had was that apparently the guy that used to live in my room before was not mentally stable, to put it bluntly. He had done weird things like take pictures of some of the girls in the house and said some quite inappropriate things, and apparently even hid in one of the girls' closets. He was eventually removed by the landlady that told him he was no longer welcome, and he had taken it really badly. He became aggressive on his moving out day, and the police had to intervene, and apparently it took 3 police officers to get rid of him. Nobody in the house had heard from him since, but I was kind of freaked out, as it was pretty scary to be honest, because I now had his room, and the guy was clearly not mentally all there from what I'd been told. I phoned the landlady and asked her for more information. I also asked if she had changed the locks for the house and my room since he moved out. She assured me that she had, and that I didn't need to worry about anything. I felt relieved knowing that the landlady was responsible, and she sounded super caring on the phone, so I was happy with her response and was able to put my worries behind me. About a week went by. I'm quite a deep sleeper. It takes a lot for me to wake up. I've always been this way since I was a child. I was peacefully sleeping one night when I thought I could hear noises coming from around the house. I was in such a deep sleep that I couldn't tell if I was dreaming or not, but I could hear doors being closed and floorboards creaking. I suddenly woke up, and I had the feeling that there was someone else in my bedroom. Something was not quite right. My room was pitch black, but I felt as though I could hear breathing coming from the corner of my room. I sat up in my bed and tried to look around, but my eyes could not adjust to the darkness. I then turned on my bedside lamp, and there, sat in the corner of my room, was a man that I had never met, with a giant coat on. I screamed from sheer fear, but he didn't move. My housemates ran in because they heard my screams, and the guy stood up and became very aggressive, saying that it was his room. After 10 minutes of shouting and arguing, the guy finally left. He'd made a copy of my room key and had copied the house keys and had let himself in. The landlady basically lied to me about changing the locks because she was too lazy to do it herself. I was and am still furious. This happened a month ago. We've had the locks changed since then, but I'm so scared that this guy's going to come back because he's already done it once. Hi there everyone. I just wanted to say thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know down below if you've had any crazy roommate experiences, or simply leave a comment about the video. If you like this video, please leave a like, as it really helps my channel grow, and subscribe for more real life horror.